So thanks so much for joining me on early Saturday morning. My name is Amanda Ruth, and as you probably saw in my bio, I work with the professional development system. I always say my former life, but it still bleeds into my current life. I was a K-12 math teacher, so math is kind of my home. It's where I like to live. It's what I like to do, but I also have lots of different reaches in adult education. I've been in adult education for about 11 years, so I've done a lot of different positions. If there's a tool that you see here that you can think of to adapt to a different ways that they can be used. So I hope that you've got your math brains on. I will tell you that when I originally was an elementary school student, I was terrible in math. Didn't like it, hated it. Third grade math, I was sure that I was never going to make it through. And so the fact that I became a math teacher, I think would have astonished a lot of my early teachers. But at the same time, I have two daughters who also struggle in math as well. So, what I like to always tell my students is my way of learning math doesn't need to be your way of learning math. And if there's a different way that you like to see something presented, if there's something that makes sense to you, a different way than I say it, please let me know because I always like to learn a little bit when I present as well. So today we're going to start with some warm-up activities. I know that as you're getting started in your session, if you're a classroom aide or if you're tutoring one-on-one or in a small group, sometimes as everybody's coming together, it's a good way of just getting everybody's math brain warmed up. So nobody likes to be cold caught into solving a math equation. So one of the favorite warm-up activities that I have is Would You Rather? And this is a game that you may have played before, you may have heard your kids play before. And the way that I usually do this is I present it in a slide, just like this. I also, one of the tools that I'm going to pull out shortly is a Padlet or Padlet Sandbox. If you haven't used that before, it's a tool that I really do like to use. All of the tools that I'm going to show you today have at least a free startup type of membership where you may be able to do some of the things, but you may not be able to solve or save multiple. So you can at least try it out to see if it's something that might work for you or for your students without having to do any sort of commitment. Also, if you check in with your agency, sometimes they have agency memberships that you might be able to take advantage of as well. So how does Would You Rather work? So if you are in a remote atmosphere and you're using Zoom or you're using a similar type platform, you could put up a slide like this, and then you can ask everybody to vote. So if you guys know how to use the annotate tool, you should see it in your top toolbar. There's a little pencil that says annotate. And once you select annotate, you should have the option to put a stamp. The stamp is like a little check mark, or you can draw however you would like to do it. So I'd like to take just a couple of seconds. Would you rather take a taxi, an Uber, or Lyft? So something more personal, or would you rather ride the bus? And I'll go ahead and put my vote on here as well, just because it wouldn't be fair. So I would rather ride the bus. Okay, we've got lots of bus riders. Perfect. So now I'm going to change a little bit. So would you rather take a taxi, Uber, or Lyft, or ride the bus if you were going to go grocery shopping? And if you feel like you would like to change your vote, you can either put a stamp on the other one or you can move your stamp. So we're still going with ride the bus, okay? And I think a lot of times that depends too on, oh, okay, found the annotate, good. On whether or not maybe you're just going for a bag of groceries versus if I'm going for my weekly grocery haul, I may want to take an Uber, a taxi, or a Lyft because I need to have that extra space. What about would you rather take a taxi, Uber, or Lyft, or ride the bus if you were going to visit a friend in a different state? Would that change anybody's? Okay. So kind of looking at where you go. And I think depending on, the type of transportation that's available to you, this is, a good place to talk about why would it be more cost effective to ride the bus to a different state versus taking a taxi? Well, it might be less expensive or it might be more expensive. So just a great way to take an opportunity to look at what we've got here and a good way to get people thinking in the math realm. All right. So oh, our next warm-up activity is which one is different? And for this one, there's a lot of different ways that we can take it. I have 3 different examples. We're going to look at both the Polypad generator as well as our Padlet sandbox. So in order to do that, I am going to bring it up here on my screen. You can see you could do the would you rather as well, but you can also look at the which one is different. And I'm going to go ahead and give you a share link so that if you would like to join us, you most certainly can. Go ahead and put that in the chat. And anything that I give you today is something that I have created. So if you like it and you want to use it, you can feel free to make a copy. You can feel free to use something similar as well. Like I said, this is one of the tools that I really like, and it's called Padlet Sandbox. And Padlet Sandbox lets you use different templates if you want to use a template, or you can kind of start from the bottom and go into your own. And what Padlet Sandbox allows you to do is to select on your left-hand side, you're going to see some different frames. That's what they call their individual cards. And if you go down to the 3rd card, you should see the same one that's on my screen right now, which one is different. And you can take an opportunity and you can ask students, which number do you think is different? Some people say which one doesn't belong. That's also an acceptable way. This time you can use your annotate on Zoom, but you can also go over here into the toolbar on the right and you can select different shapes as well. So I am going to say that I think, I think 81 is different. You can change the color of your shape if you would like. All right. Somebody else some other folks are agreeing with me that 81 is different. I do see some folks are saying 16 is different. So does anybody want to unmute and say, why do you think 81 is different? Right? If I was going to say, yes, exactly. Somebody put that up there. It's the odd one. So odd, so that makes it different. You could also talk about, depending on where your lesson is going, you could talk about whether things are perfect squares or whether they're divisible by 2 or another number, 3 or 5. So this is another great way of just kind of previewing their knowledge. A lot of times I'll do this with fractions or decimals, where maybe I want them to be able to reduce the fraction. So I'll put 3 fractions that can reduce, but maybe one that doesn't. The thing that I really like about this activity is there is usually always inevitably at least one of my students that picks something different than everybody else, and they get to explain why they think that number is different. In addition to having the Padlet, there are different generators that you can use. I usually have an idea of where I want my students to go, and maybe that's what influences how I pick the numbers that I use. But also there is a generator that if you don't want to have to think about it, you want to throw it just up on the screen, that is an option as well. So I'm going to come back to my presentation. And all of these links are in the presentation that you have access to. And if anything doesn't work, please just let me know and I'll be happy to help you out with that. So the Polypad is a tool that we'll look at a little bit more, but the Polypad generator, you can have different numbers that it will pick. And then you get to decide. You've got 25, 19, 7, and 22. And you can say, oh, which one is different? This time, not just one is odd, so we can't just go odd and even. But at the same time, we could look at, once again, divisibility. We could look at the numbers that it divides into. You could look at a common factor. And with the Polypad generator, if you just keep clicking generate, it's going to keep changing those numbers. So sometimes it takes students a little bit of time to get used to it. So you might want to do more than just one. But if you want to, once again, specifically look at something, if you come down to these three dots, and you don't have to be signed in to do any of this, this is just a link that you can click on. You can see that there's different ways that you can make your circles. You can have dice or dot arrangements, equations, fraction bars. So there's lots of different implications. You can go down real low to look at prime and even and odd numbers. You can go all the way up to looking at polygons, to looking at equations. So the link to this app I can throw right in the chat. There you go. And you don't have to be signed in or anything like that. You should be able to see this and go in. Now, if we're going to talk about Polypad and Amplify Classroom, if you want to add this into an activity, that's absolutely a possibility as well. So you can definitely take this into lots of different directions. I once had a group of students and they were really struggling to get going one morning. So I assigned a corner of the classroom as A, B, C, and D, and I had to get them up and I had to have them move to those corners because they needed to get their blood moving. I used to teach in the evening, and the same thing would happen where everybody would be coming off. They'd have a long day. They needed some movement. So this is a great way of saying, okay, choose, this group of desks, talk with your group, because maybe they have an idea that 19 is the odd one out, but they don't know why. So it gives them an opportunity to use some of those math words and some of those math skills. Sometimes they'll give them a little bit of a word bank. These are the words you might want to consider as you're talking about these numbers, so that they get the math vocabulary as well as getting, some experience with the numbers. So definitely one of my favorite tools to use as I'm planning for my students. And it's usually a pretty quick activity. Doesn't take, too long for us to get through. So they usually enjoy it fairly well. All right. So you got to see the Padlet sandbox that I put up there, but also the Polypad generator. If you're in person, and I haven't taught an in-person class recently, like I said, we could put people in different corners. If you projected it and you use different color sticky notes, where not only could they pick their number that's different, but they could also write out the reason why, but they don't have to talk about it if they're a little bit apprehensive. Or you could talk about individual whiteboards. I used to have little ones I got from, I think it was the dollar store, that they could put their number up and then they could write their reason on below, so that everybody could kind of vote without necessarily having to, once again, they don't have to participate and talk if they aren't interested. All right. And like I said, if you have any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. Tutoring one-on-one, and think several to do online. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. It's definitely helpful. All right. So this is another fun tool that I use. Similar to which one doesn't belong. We can look at the number of the day. So I am going to pop back to my Padlet so you can see an example of this. All right, so here is the number of the day. The number of the day today is 144. And what I'll ask my students to do is I'll ask them to tell me anything that they know about the number 144. So if you would like, there are two different options for you to use on the Padlet Sandbox. This T is the text tool. So if you hit the T and then come over to here, you are able to type right on the card. Or if you use a note is down here. You can pick whatever color and you can pop the note on. And then you can tell me about 144. So I know that 144, I like square roots. The square root, type rightly, is 12. So that may be something that they know. If you have a particular skill that you're talking about, maybe you want to talk about factors. You can talk about the factors of 144 or the prime factorization. If you're talking about, is it a prime number? Is it a composite number? 100 plus 44, all right? Or if we wanted to even break it down into all of its place value, 100 plus 40 plus 4, right? So there's lots of different opportunities that we can look at. It is even. Thank you. Yep. So once again, this gives them some time to talk about those math topics and start using that vocabulary, start hearing the vocabulary. I know a lot of times on the TABE or the CASAS test that they may have taken at the very beginning, they might have seen some of these words and they don't know what is a prime number or what is a composite number. This is a great way to introduce, especially just talking about, well, how do we tell if it's prime or composite? And figuring out exactly what you want to do. Do you model this activity with a sample number? So oftentimes, my very first class, I'll do a lot of these different samples so that the students will know how to do it. Recently, when I talked about I had a class that I was working in a prison population. And so they didn't have the opportunity to participate virtually like you did. But we did about two or three of them so that they got the hang of it. But then the next class, they were able to kind of do it with just one. So sometimes one activity may lend itself better to another. This Padlet Sandbox, the page that I have is actually a template. It's called Number of the Day. So it's something that you can easily put together and then have the students look at it. But usually they'll need some type of an introduction so that they understand how you're expecting their answer to look or what they need to do in order to be able to participate. And a lot of times too, I'll tell my students, think about what we've been doing in the past couple of classes. Maybe we've been doing square roots or we're factoring, and they'll kind of go, oh yeah, that's something I know about this. But also if you have those tests coming up and you want to make sure that they've got the vocabulary down, because they've got the skill, they need the vocabulary to go with it. See here. I'm gonna just move this. Perfect. All right. And once again, although I did this on a Padlet Sandbox, this is easy to do in person. You could have this on a board. You could just ask students, tell me more. That's one of my favorite phrases, and my students always get very frustrated when I say it because they'll say, "Oh, it's even," and I'll say, "Okay, tell me more," and just keep asking. What more can you tell me about this? This number has its own story. We talk a lot about stories and relating numbers to life. So tell me the story of this number. How did it become 144? What digits, how could you represent it if you were representing it instead of a number as something else? Absolutely, Anita. Thank you. Great part of your warm up routine. So, once again, you're kind of waking up their math brain before you're looking at what do they need to get accomplished for the day. I always tell people not to pity my kids too much, but my kids are my best guinea pigs. So oftentimes I'll throw something up and I'll say, "Tell me about this. What do you know?" And I have one daughter who really just doesn't like math at all, and she's usually, what I model my students after, because it's like pulling teeth to get her to talk about it. But usually once I can get her to start talking about it, it wakes up a math brain in a little bit more of a friendly way, I guess you could say. The next one, and this one is a tough one for some students, but this one is called wrong answers only. So I know, or what the question is what is 35% of 63? Daughter saw this yesterday as I was putting this together, and I said, "What's a wrong answer for this?" She's like, "Oh, I can't do percents." And I said, "That's okay. You don't have to do percents. Tell me a wrong answer." And she said, "2." And I said, "Okay, why?" Now you get to get their math brain thinking again. That's a wrong answer. You're absolutely right. You're not asking for the right answer, but tell me some wrong answers. And so she said, "Well, 263 to 35%. I don't know. It's too small." I said, "You're absolutely right. 2 is too small to be 35% of 63." And so I said, "Well, what's half of 63?" She said, "I don't know, somewhere around 30." And I said, "Okay, there's another incorrect answer, 30." She's like, "Well, why is that incorrect?" And I said, "Well, we talked about half of 63. So half of 63 would be what percent?" She thought about it a little while and then she said, "Oh, that'd be 50%." And I said, "Yes, you're right. 50% is not 35%." So it gives, you want them to have the wrong answer so they're not as afraid, I guess, to say the wrong thing because you want it to be wrong. But then you follow up with why. Why isn't it wrong? Because it's not just good enough to tell me that 2 is not the right answer. I need to know why. Um, a lot of times when I'm putting the tip on the check for the restaurant, my kids will ask me, "How do you do that so quick in your head?" And I say, "Well, it's magic." Um, but no, really, I usually go, "What's 10% of whatever my total is?" We could say 63. 6.3. Well, I'm going to double it because I usually take 20%. I used to be a waitress, so I know what it's like. So they oftentimes will talk about, being able to easily find 10%. And I say, "Okay, it's 10%. So you could figure out what 30% of 63 is. You could figure out what 40% of 63 is. And then if I had to, I could keep going back and forth until I was able to figure out exactly what the right answer is." Now, we used percents here, but that doesn't mean that's the only way to do this. If you put an equation up and you said, um, "What is x equal to if x plus 4 is equal to 10?" You want wrong answers only. So if they give you the right answer, you're going to say, "No, no, 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 that's not what I'm looking for. Give me a wrong answer." And then once again, tell me why. So if I had x plus 4 is equal to 14, I know my answer could not be negative 10. Couldn't be negative 10 because if I plug it in, that's going to give me a negative number. And my answer isn't, x is not equal to a negative number. So you can definitely make this a little bit more difficult or a little bit easier depending on what your audience looks like. All right. And I know I'm spending a lot of time on warm-ups because those tend to be my favorite, but we are going to get into some assessment activities as well as some teaching activities here shortly. So the next one is convince me that. My daughter had a lot of fun with this one because it was a typical problem. We have 3/8 plus 1/4, and it's equal to 4/12. And I said, "But that's not an equal sign, it's a not equal sign. So I know that it's not equal to 4/12. Why?" So with this sandbox, I just had the card and then I made some squares. And you could use the squares, you could use different shapes, you could use circles, you could have fraction bars up here that they could use. So for my class, what I would do is I would tell them, "Okay, here's a square for 3/8. and here's a square for 1/4, and here's a square for 4/12. Okay. So if I want them to convince me that 3/8 plus 1/4 is not equal to 4/12, which would be a common mistake that lots of folks would make, show me. So if you want, you can take your pointer tool, which is up in the kind of top left-hand corner, and you can drag and drop, there's a ton of them, these lines to make this box into something that would represent 3/8, or this represents 1/4. So if you want to move around those tools, and I'll kind of talk as you do this, and if nobody volunteers, that's okay. I'll show you as well. But what I usually talk about is if we're comparing pieces of pizza, because I like pizza, and my kids do too. So we oftentimes talk about if you get a piece of pizza that's this big, and your friend or your sister, more importantly, gets a piece that's this big, how do you compare those two? Well, you can't. You can't compare if she got 3 of those little pieces and you got 1 of that bigger piece. How do you know that she got more? Well, just because she had 3? That doesn't make sense. So what do we have to do in order to make this an eighth or a quarter? And I actually talked a little bit more about, once we got down to talking about eighths and quarters, we turned it into thirds and halves, and we talked about unit fractions, and we started talking about things. So if I was working with a student and they were struggling to figure this out, I'm going to grab one of these bars here for the quarter, and I'm going to say, well, my chocolate bar for a quarter going to look something like this, because now I've broken it into 4 pieces. And I'm going to take my marker and I'm going to color in one of these, whoops, one of these boxes, because that represents my 1/4. So if that represents my 1/4, how do I make 3/8? What do I have to do? So if I come back to my pointer here and I make my 1/4 again, or my quarters. Does that mean I color 3 boxes? No, because they're not the same size, right? So I have to figure out how to make that into an eighth. So if I was going to do that, I would probably let my students think about it for a little bit. I know we're a little short on time, so I'm gonna skip and I'm gonna say, well, if I divide each of these boxes into eighths, now I do have 8 pieces and I can pick just 3 of them. So I'm going to pick this one and this one and this one. Well, once again, I can't compare those 2 pieces because one is a little tiny piece and the other one is bigger. So that means I'm probably going to have to do something to this one that's a quarter as well. Any ideas about what I'm going to do with one of those to a quarter? So my students will probably be able to say, oh, well, you got to make it smaller. Okay. Should I make it smaller like this? Yeah. And I'm going to make it smaller like this. So now they both are chocolate bars again. Chocolate bars and pizza. I mean, can I think of a better way to spend a Saturday morning? Um, so when I do that, now you can see, oh, okay, well, now when I have all of my chocolate bar size pieces, I can see that I've got 3 of those and actually 2 of those. So 3 and 2 gives me 5. Out of how many pieces did I have total? I had 8. So then you could talk a little bit more about, fractions, how they look like or what they look like, but also looking at why doesn't the algorithm that a lot of our students use, just add straight across the top, straight across the bottom, why doesn't that work? Well, because if I looked at something with twelfths, I'd have to break this into thirds, and then I'd break it into, oh man. Nope, that doesn't work. Got to move these around here a little bit. So now 3, 6, 9. Oh man, I still didn't do it right. So we gotta move some stuff around some more. So I'm gonna put this one back here. I'm gonna move this. So you can show your students, just like you have to kind of go through the whole process, they can go through that whole process as well. So maybe I'm gonna do this, but I'm gonna move these over this way. Grab another one of these. Nope, that's not going to work. So they can keep playing around to figure out how to get a 12th, but they're going to see that that's not the same size as these bars right here. So they can play. And all of these are just shapes that you can create. I basically make a pile of them so that they can move them around as many times as they want. And if you want to reset it after you're finished, you can use the undo button and it'll undo all of my progress and moving around. Sometimes it looks a little crazy, but it's no um, permanent fixture that you have to change. But you can challenge some of those common mistakes that they make with fractions or with decimals by having them represent them in another way. Once again, this is with Padlet Sandbox and using the tools that they have, but we're also going to look at Polypad, and Polypad has some of the same tools that you would be able to use if you were interested in looking at that. All right, and here's the last warm-up activity that I'm going to give you. This is what I use a lot of times on my very first class when I'm meeting students, and it's all about me. Once again, this is a template from Padlet Sandbox, but you could just list these things up on a board or give them different questions. So this was something I started because my students are always worried about a couple of things. Do I have kids? Yes, I have kids. How many kids do I have? Well, I'm going to make you solve a math problem in order to figure out how many kids I have, because I can't just give you the answer. Or a lot of times they want to know, how long have you been teaching for? Or, what is your favorite number? Sometimes they want to know when, my birthday is or how old I am. So it's a good, fun way of getting, if you want to know if your students have a skill. A lot of these are using the order of operations, but you see that there's one that's a square root. If they say, what does that squiggly line mean? Oh, you don't have experience with square roots. Let's figure out what those are called so that you can figure out what to do. There is a fraction problem. If they don't know how to find a fraction problem, maybe they're going to have a little bit of trouble with that. So these are all just different ways of getting to know a little bit about them, but also getting to know a little bit about you. My favorite thing to do with this is I give them this slide so that they get to learn about me. And then I ask them to create one about themselves. And I know a lot of our students have lots of different experiences and they may not have kids, they may have pets instead. They may have had a job that's very different, or they're just changing jobs based on, something that's happened. So they can really take this and they can alter it any way that they would like. So I have this frozen so that you guys can't change it. But if you click on this, you can change it from my birthday is. Maybe they don't want people to know when their birthday is, but they want you to know what month their birthday is in. We could say you could just change it to the month as opposed to the month and the day. And like I said, if they don't have kids, maybe they want to talk about their pets, or maybe they want to talk about, how long they've lived somewhere. Maybe they've lived somewhere other than the current state that they're in, and they want to take that in there. So this is all about them, but they get to do it by the numbers. That's what I usually call it, me by the numbers. So it's just a fun way to get to know your students. And like I said, this is a template that you can pop up on Padlet Sandbox, but there's lots of different ways that you could also do this. Before, I had my students do it as a scavenger hunt. when we were in a building, they would have to go to the room number of what it would found out, and they went from room to room. It would be really fun if there would be two common numbers where you might be able to go, oh, I thought this was the right number, and then realize you skipped a clue. So that's fun. I did see in the chat you asked me about Polypad and Padlet Sandbox to be seem similar. Do you prefer one over the other? And that really just goes a little bit more into what you're using it for. Padlet Sandbox doesn't have some of the specific tools that Polypad has. So you'll see it in a little bit. They have coins and they have fraction bars, whereas I can make a fraction bar on Polypad, but I can't necessarily have it just automatically populate. So it depends on exactly what I'm looking for. Padlet Sandbox tends to be really instructor and student friendly. It's an easy resource to get students to use because the controls are fairly simplistic. Polypad has a little bit more of a learning curve to it. So sometimes on the instructor part, sometimes on the student part, and how they have to interact with those tools. So that can be a little bit tricky. So it really just depends on the situation. I usually always have a Padlet Sandbox open because I use it almost like a whiteboard if I'm doing tutoring virtually. But at the same time, if I'm in person, I may not have this up. And then that might be when Polypad would be better because I can just show on the whiteboard, here's the tool that I specifically need. I hope that answers your question. All right, thank you. All right, so we've gotten through a lot of these different activities that you've seen to warm your students up. Hopefully by now they've gotten warmed up. I'm going to come and I'm going to flip through. And like I said, almost all of this is also in my PowerPoint presentation. If there's anything that you need, you can go back to either or. The Padlet will remain open as well. So like I said, if you see something that you like, feel free to steal from me. Nothing that I have is proprietary that you wouldn't be able to use. So we're going to talk now a little bit about some teaching activities that I really like to use. So this is one that I use frequently in my professional development life because we talk a little bit about notice and wonder. So a notice and wonder activity, you might give students, and this is works really nice with a slow reveal type format where maybe you give them just a little bit of information, have them look at it, tell me what you can tell me about this, and then you give them an additional piece of information and you kind of build on it so that the students are looking at what exactly they know and using those skills that they've had in the past that you might want to be trying to wake up as you're working. So an example of the notice and wonder activity could be something like this. So you give them this graph, you've got the X and the Y axis, and you have two purple lines and you have a green line. And what I'm asking about is, what do you notice? What do you wonder? So you can use the Post-it notes over here. You can use the text box. You can put a shape in there and then type inside the shape. These are some of the kind of the prompts that I would give my students if they were struggling. So I may not have them there when we first open it up, but all the lines are this, or all the lines are that. We can talk about the equations of the lines, or we can talk about the features that the lines don't have. So if my students were looking at this, this would probably be something I would do before we started graphing. Maybe they had graphed points, but we hadn't connected them to the equations of the line yet. So as they're looking about what do they notice, what do they wonder, I purposely color-coded the two horizontal lines as purple and the vertical line is green, so that if they didn't connect that this was X is equal to 4 and this is Y is equal to 4, they would be able to talk about the lines in a different way. So a lot of times making things more approachable, once again, talking about what do you notice about the purple lines? Okay, and they might put a post-it on there. We notice that they're both horizontal. Okay. And if they have graphed points, once again, you could ask them to start looking at the points that are on the line. What do you notice about all the points that are on the line? Oh, well, they all have a y coordinate that is 4. How does that relate to the equation of the line? So once again, you could kind of put these pieces on individually as you're moving through in a slow reveal format versus having everything available, but you're having them access the prior knowledge, bringing it forward into whatever you're working on currently. If you're talking about slope, maybe you're talking about what are the slopes of the lines. Well, any line that's completely horizontal, do you know the slope of that? It's always going to be the same. And then you could talk about lines that are parallel, or you could talk about perpendicular. So introducing the vocabulary as well as, having a way of having them kind of look at things. This is the background of this slide is just a graph format, and then I took all of the lines and added them myself. But you could also do this if you used Desmo's graphing calculator before. You could put all of the equations there and hide the equations, but just have them look at the lines and then kind of move forward. Usually I talk about slope man, and slope man has 4 different ways that he can represent himself. He can be a zero slope, he can be an undefined slope, he can be positive or negative. So a lot of times I'll start talking about things that they might remember. So think about slope man. What would slope man do along these lines? Would he be able to climb them? Would he not? And then that can kind of awake up that prior knowledge as you start to move on to the next type of activity. All right. The next thing, and I'm going to pop back over to the PowerPoint here. So the next one I want to talk about is algebraic thinking. A lot of our students, because they have been problem solvers before, do have those algebra skills kind of laying in the background, but once again, they need to be woken up. So these 2 links that I have, they're Solve Me mobiles as well as the Splat, and they're nothing that I created. They're just 2 links, once again, that you can click on. And Solve Me mobiles, what that looks like is this right here. And you have the option to play, where you're going to try and figure out what each different color or box is representing. Or you can have them build their own mobiles and use that algebraic thinking about how to balance things out. So I'm just going to hit play. There's no logging in, no saving progress, anything like that. If you want to do that, you most certainly can. So each time that I log in here or if I open it up, it gives me the option. Do I want to be an explorer, which as you can imagine is the lower level, a puzzler, or a master? Most of my students are starting out at the Explorer level. So if you click on that, it shows you this mobile and it asks, what does the triangle equal and what does the circle equal? So sometimes students won't realize that this number 10 is up here. And they might go, well, it could be anything. And then you might have to point that out. A lot of times what happens next is they'll say, oh, well, there's lots of different ways to make 10. And I'll say, you're absolutely right. There's lots of different ways to make 10. What do you think cannot access through the slide? Was the link, please? Sure, I will pop that in the chat. And I will make sure that I go back through and correct that in the slideshow. So they might say it's 1 and 9. And I said, no, it's not 1 and 9. They're like, how do you know? Well, I'm a math teacher, I know. But what's going to end up happening is this has to be 5 and 5. And eventually they'll get to that. And why does it have to be 5 and 5? Well, because the bar is equal. if you had any other combination, it would end up being something different. So like, let's say that I put 4 and 6 in here. So the mobile will actually tip to show you, oh, that doesn't work. So sometimes students can work on this kind of on their own, but it does get a little bit tricky. And as the puzzles get a little bit harder, you can see that they change. So they're telling you that these are 2, but they want to know what the little trapezoid is. And it's always funny because my students don't always know what those shapes are. So hearing them, the weird box one. So you can also correct some of the vocabulary there before we were working on geometry, just giving them an idea as to what to do. But that's a great way of getting that algebraic thinking going without it being too unapproachable. With Zoom, if you use your annotate tool, you can start to connect what this is doing with your equation. This is really x plus 2 is equal to 6 because we can figure out what this number is and we know that this is 2. So you can start to kind of develop the working with the different equations and kind of what they're looking at, or maybe you want to say it's 3 times 2 and then kind of move it through there depending on what it is. You can see that they will give you little hints in the bottom right hand corner if you've stayed kind of on a place for too long. So that's an option. The other one is the splat. And what splat does is it gives you a number of dots. It usually tells you how many dots you see. The first one walks them through it step by step. The subsequent ones don't. So you have 19 dots. I'm going to cover it with a splat. What does this look like? How many dots are underneath the splat? That's what they're going to ask. And once again, you can take this and you can relate it back to the algebraic thinking. Well, we knew that it was equal to 19. So, oops. We knew that it was equal to 19. The splotch is covering, so that's going to be our x. We don't know, and there's 11 dots there. So 11, x plus 11 is equal to 19. How do you figure that out? You can talk about, well, I just took 19 and 11, and I figured out what the difference was. What does difference mean? Difference really means subtraction. What do you notice about subtraction? Subtraction is the opposite of addition. So kind of working through these. And the splats are actually a resource that someone created. His name is Steve, and it's down in the bottom corner. Steve, I'm going to say Borney. I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce it. But what he did is he made multiple of these. So this one has just one splotch. You can have other ones that have more splotches. So as your students get better and stronger at solving them, you can kind of make the difficulty get amped up. And it's a blog that you can go to. There's no signing in. There's no anything. Adult Numeracy Network, which is one of the resources linked on my final slide, is also on there. And so because of that, if you have any questions, that would be a great place to go as well. I'm going to try and... doesn't want to let me move. There we go. Now we're back. All right. And I see my time here is getting really short, so I apologize for not being able to get into everything here. But like I said, if you have questions, please let me know and I'll be happy to look at that. So Desmos and Amplify Classroom is, I think, probably the last resource that we're going to get to, but that is where you can get to Polypad, which I talked about an awful lot. So let me see here. So this is Amplify Classroom. And once again, this is a free account. And what you can do is you can look at this in teacher mode, or you can look at this in student mode. So this is a Polypad screen. where I'm asking them to place $1.45 into the circle. So what the student would do is pick up these different tools and drag them into the circle. You could look at this way. There's also a notice and wonder activity that I created here. So this toolbar right here is the Polypad toolbar. And I'll show you how to get there if you're interested. And it has different shapes. You can look at different numbers. Once again, it's got those fraction bars and circles. And I'm actually going to pop over to this third one right here. So I made a number line and I asked students to break the number line into halves. But if you wanted to, you could come up to the fraction bars and you could talk about this is a half. You could come back. So that's 1/2. You can also split it so that you could move the individual parts. Right? And you can come back over here. Besides halves, it goes all the way down to 12ths. So if you were talking about unit fractions, you would be able to do that. If you don't like bars, you could do circles as well. So they have both of those options. Once again, all the way from a whole down to a 12th. And also there's some different algebra tiles. You have a balance scale, the function machine. I don't know if any of you have used the function machine from Math Playground, but with Math Playground, there's lots of ads. So this has a function machine that has no ads. With the Amplify Classroom, you can either have the students go at their own pace, which if you joined right now, you would be able to see, you could go at your own pace through any of these. You can sync to me, which means they have to be on the same tile as you, or you can also pace. And pace lets you select how many of these screens you want them to have access to. So if I was going to give this to a group of students, I could select that maybe I just wanted them to do the number line once. So they could go back and forth between those three, but they wouldn't be able to go all the way back to the beginning or all the way to the end. And you can also see their work if you're not in person with each other. You can see where they're at in the process without them having to tell you what they're doing or thinking. Okay, so I need to go back to my teacher dashboard. All right. And with any of these individual parts, I would be able to look at and I would be able to create new slides. Now, because this one is already active, I have to go up here to edit my activity. So there's a little 3 dots here to edit your activity. And once I do that, it does make all of the slides no longer usable for the time being. But if you had a particular, you wanted to add like a math response, free response, or multiple choice, that's part of just the Amplify Classroom. If you would want to add a Polypad, this is what the Polypad looks like, and you could build any type of activity. A lot of times my students didn't have a lot of experience with probability and statistics, and they do have a whole section where you can use different tools for the probability and statistics. So there's dice and cards and spinners. They also have pre-built activities that you can look through, so you don't have to create all of the activities yourself. And Polypad is also linked in my presentation with some of the different tools that you can use. So Desmos Classroom or Amplify Classroom is where you can find some of these pre-created activities, or you can build your own. But there's also the graphing calculator. And here's some ideas from Polypad of different things that you can look at. So I apologize that I spent so much time and didn't get a chance to look too much at the other activities. I did see that there were some questions in the chat. Yes, Amplify is free. And with Amplify, I believe you can make up to 5 different activities before they'll tell you you have to go back and like delete an activity, or they limit the amount. So with the Amplify free version, you can still get into almost all of the functions. A copy of my presentation is available in the program, or if you need it, feel free to reach out and I can definitely provide that, or any helpful activities. Just real quick, I know we're just about out of time, but if you look at math puzzles, this is going to show my age, but I used to love those worksheets that we would get in class that had the cheesy riddle at the top, and that's how you knew you did the problem right, because you had the letters that made some kind of riddle or something. These are basically a different version of this. The GeoGebra is a puzzle where you match the different sides, as well as the Tarza Maker. That one comes out as a PDF. So if you like to have your students put puzzles together, they're definitely an option that you've got to look at. Pixel art. So pixel art is something that they use a lot of times in the K-12 system, and it's based off of mine, or at least based off Google Sheets. It could be an Excel document as well. And you use conditional formatting. If you've ever used Teacher Pay Teachers, they do have some of these that are already created, but you can also create your one. And the basic premise besides of these is that they get the answer correct, and then it shows up as a color on the other side of the screen, and it makes a picture once it's finished. So it's once again like those cheesy riddle worksheets, where you get to see if your Mario makes sense, or whatever picture you have. This is an example of a very simplistic one that I used. You are free to go ahead and click on it, share it, use it. But at the same time, if you want to make it your own, I ask that you make a copy, just so that you're able to make the changes without changing my format. So once again, my email is at the bottom here. I apologize that we had to rush through that last little part, but I did want to give you guys a chance to ask any questions if you have.